Hey everyone, in this video I will show you my Templar Dungeon and Arena healer build for Waking Flame. While Templar received some changes on paper, nothing really changed, and so the build essentially stays the same from Blackwood. So for those of you that are new to this build series, it is an off-healer build. A build that is able to do considerable damage while still being fully capable to heal and support. This is, in my opinion, the most effective playstyle for healers in a 4-player environment, as it has the safety and comfort of playing with a healer while also being able to achieve some of the highest group damage, enabling burst tactics. I also really like it for pickup groups, as the versatility is ideal for countering any potential weaknesses, and the damage potential is enough to even carry easier content. The build is absolutely designed for experienced players. However, I've also gotten a lot of positive feedback from less experienced players in the past as well, so I would recommend you watch the entire video first and then decide whether this is a build that suits your playstyle and experience level or not. For the race, I'm continuing to play Breton. It is an efficient choice, as this build can really utilize the sustain. Altmer, Dunmer and Khajiit are really good choices as well, that can result in more DPS in shorter fights, but in consequence have more sustain issues. For the Mundus stone, I am using Thief. It is performing better than Shadow by quite a bit, so it is the choice for all build variations I will show you in this video. I play with 46 attribute points in Magicka, and as buff food I use Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Citrus Filet. You can also put some points into health if you have to, but it will lose you damage and I don't find it necessary. For the potions, the ideal choice is Spellpower, but Magicka drop pots should be fine for easier content as well. For the main sets, I use Spellpower Cure and Master Architect. Spellpower Cure remains on top of the support set food chain, being just super strong and convenient to play. Master Architect is an amazing choice for this build in particular, as it synergizes well with Templar and can be backpowered. The remaining slots I then use for a Maelstrom Destruction Staff and a mythic item. The two options here are Harpooner's Warding Kilt and Death Dealer's Fate. While the Kilt has by far the highest DPS potential, the ring is significantly more reliable and therefore my choice. For alternative gear options, you could replace Master Architect with another backbar only set. I think the most interesting options are Saxhley Champion, Roaring Opportunist, Hollowfang Thirst, or Stone Talker's Oath. You can also play monster sets instead of the mythic items. Mother Sea Knight or Iceheart could be interesting for really safe achievements, but outside of that I wouldn't recommend it, as both mythic items outperform monster sets quite easily. Unless you just don't have the mythics, of course. You can also play with 2 double bard sets, either with double arena weapons or dropping the Maelstrom Staff. The only case where I would recommend that is for using Elemental Catalyst in long and static single target fights, as it is the by far strongest damage support set in those scenarios. You could also backbar Olorim to get Elemental Catalyst into your build, but I would only do that with really well coordinated groups. For easier to get gear options, you first of all can use the normal version of all perfected sets. For the 5-piece sets, I would recommend getting Spellpower Cure as soon as you can. For an easy build completion, you could then craft or buy a Magicka DPS set like Mother Sorrow or Julianos. Of course, the alternative support sets to replace Master Architect with can also be easier to get gear options. Depending on the set choice, you will end up with different armor type combinations, but you want as much light armor as possible, so ideally 7 pieces. For traits and enchantments, Full Divine with Magicka on the body pieces and Arcane or Infused with Spell Damage on the jewelry remains the best. Whether Arcane or Infused is better is theoretically situational, as it depends on the exact buff up times, but they are so close that it is basically irrelevant, so go with whatever you have. And for the weapons, it is Precise Shock Frontbar for combining close to maximum DPS with good vulnerability uptimes, and on the backbar it is Infused Berserker. Moving on to the champion points. The best choice for the slotted blue notes is Fighting Finesse, Backstabber, Biting Aura and Mastered Arms. Though there are arguments for playing Thaumaturge and or Weapon Expert when you either can't consistently flank or you need so much healing that you lose a lot of your direct damage, and so your dots and light attacks become more impactful. And for the general unlocking order, I recommend Precision, Fighting Finesse, Backstabber, Piercing, Biting Aura, Mastered Arms, Flawless Ritual, War Mage, Eldritch Insight, Quick Recovery, Preparation, Elemental Aegis, Hardy, Blessed, and Tireless Discipline. For the solid red nodes, I recommend Boundless Vitality, Ironclad, Rejuvenation, and Siphoning spells. Though Pain's Refuge and Sustain by Suffering can be better in certain situations now. For the unlocking order, I recommend Boundless Vitality, Ironclad, Rejuvenation, Tumbling, Mystic Tenacity, Hero's Vigor, Siphoning spells, Defiance, Hasty, Tireless Guardian, Fortification, Nimble Protector, Savage Defense, Sprinter, Piercing Gaze, Tempered Soul, and lastly Bashing Brutality. For the next section, we look at the skills. So the main spammable is of course Puncturing Sweeps, an absolute must-have skill for the Templar as it procs the Burning Light passive, dealing really strong damage. It also works for both AoE and single target, which is really nice for dungeons, and is a very powerful self-heal on top of that. For an execute, I have Radiant Oppression, also kind of a must-have for Templar. Really powerful execute ability with high range, which is just great for quickly picking out low health targets. I then have 2 of my 4 10-second dots on my front bar, namely Unstable Wall and Mythic Orb. And the last skill slot is somewhat of a flex spot. I mostly play with Rearming Trap, sacrificing a small amount of healing for more damage and a lot more streamlined rotation. Trap also allows me to use the Ult Gem passive from Fighter's Guild again, but you can also play with Purifying Light like I did in my old builds, or Channeled Acceleration, or another dot like Scalding Rune. The DPS difference is really small. Moving on to the back bar, I have 2 additional dots, Solar Barrage and Blazing Spear. Having Blazing Spear on the back bar is important for the passive. For my healing, I then have Combat Prayer for the burst healing, and of course the minor Berserk buff and Radiating Regeneration I have as my HOT for a more passive healing output and to keep up Spellpower Cure. You can also use Illustrious Healing instead, but I think Regeneration is a lot nicer to play in 4-player groups. And in the last slot I have Siphoning Spirit as my minor Magicka steel source for additional healing. For my ultimates, I use mostly Meteor on both bars, front bar just for the passives and back bar then to actually use it, so I proc Master Architect with it. You can also play with Crescent Sweep, but I find Meteor to work better with Master Architect to save up ultimate and then have a stronger burst phase. You can also use Warhorn or Barrier in some situations, and if you don't use Master Architect, Elemental Rage is a really good choice for some stronger burst damage. In terms of passives, you want all 3 class lines, Destruction and Restoration Staff, Light Armor, Mage's Guild, Banish the Wicked from Fighter's Guild, both passives from Undaunted, all racial passives of course, and from Crafting, Medicinal Use from Alchemy, as well as Gourmand and or Connoisseur, depending on which buff food you use, from Provisioning. So before we talk about the rotation, let's quickly go over some damage comparisons. With a full DPS rotation, the damage ranges from 60k to 64k, and with healing and support from 53k to 58k. So all the main gear and skill options I've shown you perform within a pretty small DPS range, with double arena weapons at the bottom end, different offensive monster sets in the middle, and to nobody's surprise, the Mythic Kilt at the very top with the Mythic Ring as a close second. The differences between Rearming Trap, Purifying Light and other dot options are also extremely small, with Trap performing the best overall and especially in actual fights, as the longer duration makes it more efficient when using more healing. Interestingly, I also didn't notice anything from the changes to Purifying Light and Radiant Oppression. Now to the rotation. I play a partially static, partially dynamic rotation, giving me less things to track and still a lot of freedom to react to the fight. For that, I am recasting Unstable Wall, Mythic Orb, Blazing Spear and Solar Barrage in a 10-second static rotation, as well as Trap every second rotation. In the remaining time, I then dynamically use my healing, support and spammable, prioritizing of course healing and keeping up the support, and then using the remaining time to push DPS with my spammables. With Templar's DPS absolutely depending on Puncturing Sweeps and Radiant Oppression, we want to have as much time for using them as possible, while also keeping up our dots and support. For that, we need to utilize pre-buffing as much as possible. So we want to apply our support every time right before a fight, and also utilize every phase where we can't or don't need to deal damage to refresh everything, to create a small window of high burst damage afterwards, ideally also combined with our ultimate. And of course you want to be weaving. Weaving is important on every build, but even more so this one. Because a lot of the global cooldowns for an off-healer are not dealing any damage, light attacks become, relatively speaking, a more important damage source. And with the Maelstrom Staff and Solar Barrage, our light attacks deal insane DPS. Light attacks are the by far biggest single damage source, reaching situationally over 20% of the DPS. With that explanation, I've already gone into how you play this build in actual fights a bit, but there's of course a lot more to it than that. Another crucial factor is positioning. Playing a hybrid role, we need to be in a good healer position and also a good DD position at the same time. This means being in melee range while still having the damage dealers in a good position to easily heal them. I usually try standing on one side of the target, lining up both damage dealers on one side of me. And if damage dealers don't cooperate, I simply ignore them. After all, I have more important things to do than play catch with players jumping in circles. You also have to keep in mind that you're playing a high risk, high reward build. So you want to get that reward to make the risk worthwhile. And you do that by being focused and playing proactively. You want to always stay on top of the situation with keeping up your rotation, managing your resources and positioning, and most importantly, thinking about what will happen next so you can react quickly and precisely. This is what makes it safe to play with so little healing, controlling the risk and getting some nice damage as a reward. So that's it for this video. A build summary is also in the description. As always, please feel free to ask me any further questions in the comments, and thank you for watching.